Tupac had stopped breathing, but every time they revived him, he just went back, and I asked them to leave him alone and to let him go. I rejoiced.
Before the skyline, before the blocks, there was Chicago. It was a strategic shadow zone of marshland and wild garlic sitting atop a continental divide. A unique geological fluke forged into identity. The Chicago Portage. This 6-mile stretch of mud was the only place on the continent where the Great Lakes meet with Mississippi River systems, making it the ultimate bottleneck for power, trade, and extraction. Founded by the Haitian-born Jean-Baptiste, this wasn't a city built for comfort. It was a machine built for transit. From its roots as a 10,000-year-old trail to its rise as a hog butcher for the world, Chicago has always been a place where geography dictates survival, and the high ground is the only ground that matters. But when you build a city on a crossroad, you build it on a battlefield. You create a place where the soil itself feels heavy with the cost of being at the center of everything. The shooting at 79th and May in Chicago this past Wednesday weighed heavily on me. I couldn't sleep after hearing about it. Now, I have known about Chicago's gun violence for years. I've studied it closely, I lived around it, and I carried it on the back of my mind like a shadow that I can never shake. I have been working on the story for years, trying to get it right every time something felt unfinished, like a missing piece. That shooting was the final puzzle. Now, I do believe in God's timing, and in today's episode, I'm not holding back. So here it is. Now, this isn't a headline. This is more than just numbers. This is the true story of Chicago's violence, raw, unflinching, and woven into the soil of the city itself. Now, let me ask you this. Everyone sees gun violence today. People immediately trace it back to Al Capone 80 years ago. But I've been digging much deeper. I'm looking at the very DNA of this ambush. If you want to find the patient zero of this kind of violence, you have to go back 10,000 years ago. Archaeologists found a site called Naturuk. Now, this isn't in Chicago. It's halfway across the world in Kenya. But it is the oldest evidence of a massacre in human history. 27 people, men, women, children, were ambushed and executed. It shows that the tactical hit is as old as humanity itself, a brutal instinct to control what matters, no matter the cost. But when you look at Chicago, really look at it, the pattern is impossible to ignore. The 10,000-year-old massacre at Naturuk didn't happen in Chicago, but the evidence for the strategic, deadly violence in the city goes back over 1,000 years. Archaeologists at sites like Norris Farms have pulled the truth out of the dirt. They found ancestors with arrowheads buried in their spines, skulls crushed by stone clubs. This wasn't a clash, it was an execution. It's evidence of mass carried out with a cold, clear intent. These were the Oneonta and Mississippian peoples living and dying here over a millennium ago, using the land's ridges and trails as strategic corridors, fighting and dying for control of high grounds long before the first brick of Chicago was laid. Violence wasn't random. It was about control, territory, resources, and of course, survival. Centuries later, European settlers arrived with the fur trade, bringing wealth, alliances, and more bloodshed. Native communities were attacked in calculated raids, sometimes massacred to seize land and resources, sometimes caught in conflicts fueled by competing European interests. Muskets replaced clubs and arrows, but the ruthless logic remained the same. And through it all, the ground remembers. Each ridge, each trail, each corner of this land carries the depth of violence, a curse layered through the centuries that is still felt today. Different weapons, different faces, different centuries, but the same brutal logic pulses through this ground. Once carried out with stone, wood, and iron, now echoes in gunshots and shell casing. The ridge, the streets, the soil, they remember. Every act of violence here is not just a moment in time. It's part of the chain that stretches back over 1,000 years. Lives were lost and families torn apart. And until we break it, that chain will keep snapping lives into the same story over and over again. Before we go further, let's step forward nearly a century. In the 1920s, alcohol became illegal in the United States. This period is called Prohibition. People weren't allowed to make, sell, or transport alcohol, but gangs stepped in and violence followed. It pretty much created a black market. We enter Al Capone's era, the most famous gangster in Chicago. He made millions selling illegal alcohol and controlling speakeasy. Now, this is probably your first time hearing that term, so let me give you some context, okay? A speakeasy is an illegal bar and nightclub during Prohibition in the United States from 1920 to 1933 when alcohol was banned. People still wanted to drink, so secret bars started popping up everywhere, hidden in basements and back rooms. Gangs like Al Capone ran the show. They fought a bloody war for control over every dollar and every inch of territory. The term comes from the idea that you had to speak easy, quietly about these hidden bars, which were run by gangs who fought violently over who controlled them. Money and power brought the blood. We're talking about Tommy guns in broad daylight, public execution. The streets didn't feel like neighborhoods anymore. They were battlefields, and the prizes was always the same: territory, clout, and cold hard cash. One of the most infamous events, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Let's talk about it. Al Capone's gang lined up 7 rival members and executed them in minutes. Public, brutal, and calculated, sending a clear message. The 7 members of Bugs Moran North Side Gang were lured to a supposed business meeting at a garage on 2122 North Clark Street. They were told it was a delivery or an inspection of a shipment of whiskey, so they came without their usual armed backup. Once inside, men dressed as police officers entered the garage, lined the gang members against the wall, and opened fire with Thompson submachine guns and shotguns. The disguise as cops helped ensure that they wouldn't resist. They trusted the law enforcement ruse. It was planned, public, and symbolic, meant to decimate Moran's leadership and send a warning to other rivals. Capone didn't invent Chicago's violence. He amplified it. The roots were already there: overcrowded neighborhoods, poverty, migration, and easy access to firearms. The danger today is that young people hear stories like this, the shootouts, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and instead of just learning from history, some see it as a blueprint. They hear the legend and think, I could do that. I could be like that, replicating the violence rather than learning from it. Now let's talk about Chicago's gun violence, then versus now. During Prohibition, 1920s to 1933, homicide numbers in the hundreds per year. Violence was largely organized, driven by gangs fighting over illegal liquor and territory. Weapons like the Thompson submachine gun dominated. In contrast, modern Chicago sees hundreds of homicides each year. In 2020, there was about 779 homicide. In 2021, it rose to 805 homicides. And in 2023, it dropped to 623. And in 2024, it also dropped again, 581 homicide. And in 2025, it projected 380. When you break down the data, a chilling pattern emerges. 90% of modern murders involve a firearm. In the vast majority of these cases, the weapons of choice is a handgun. We're seeing a higher scale of killing, but it's harder to pin down. It's spread out, it's messy. The social issue behind it are way more complex than a simple greed of the mob era. So this is the takeaway, okay? Chicago gun violence today isn't just a modern resurgence. It's the continuation of a pattern rooted in centuries of territorial conflict amplified by modern circumstances. And that brings us back to 79th and May. It was broad daylight, 1:25 in the afternoon, on the corner of 79th and May. A quiet street turned into a war zone. If you saw the early reports, they were wrong. They pointed to 47th and May, but that was a different tragedy on a different block. We verified the facts. This is the story of what actually happened on the corner of 79th and May. A white car sat at the curb. Suddenly, a red Alfa Romeo screeched to a halt nearby. 3 figures jumped out, wielding long-range rifles. Police say at least 3 gunmen approached the car, opened fire at point-blank range, pumping dozens of rounds into the vehicle. Inside were 26-year-old Gabrielle Eris and her 27-year-old boyfriend. Gabrielle was driving. Her boyfriend was in the passenger seat. Investigators have not publicly confirmed who the intended target was, but in many targeted attacks, positions matter. In this case, the person believed to be the target was not driving. Gabrielle was. She took the brunt of the gunfire. He survived, listed in stable condition. Witnesses say that the shooters even ran back to their getaway car and returned, firing multiple shots in a chilling execution style to finish the job before finally driving off. Before any police arrived, bystanders froze, paralyzed by the chaos. Gunfire ripped through the car, and the screams and echoes left everyone shaken, unsure if anyone had survived. When they finally rushed forward to help, the full horror revealed itself. In the back seat, their 14-year-old daughter sat, lollipop in her hand, crying as bullets shattered glass around her. And yet, she wasn't hit. Not one single bullet. Somehow, God shielded her in the middle of the chaos, a small mercy in a storm of violence. Everyone who saw it that close, neighbors, parents, people who had been mere witnesses moments ago, were dramatized, outraged, and stunned into silence. The fragility of life pressed down on them. The randomness of survival made every heartbeat felt like a gift. The sheer brutality of the attack was impossible to ignore, and in the stillness after the chaos, one truth hung heavy in the air. Life can be taken in an instant, and yet, sometimes it is spared in ways we cannot explain. Gabrielle was behind the wheel when the gunfire tore through the car. By the time help arrived, she had already been fatally wounded. Her boyfriend survived in the passenger seat, not because of choice, not because of intent, but because violence does not follow fairness or logic. No one can say for sure who the bullets were meant for. What is certain is this: she paid with her life. People who approached the scene felt it immediately. That heaviness, the hollow silence that follows. That's something that is irreversible. A young woman was gone in a second. Family shattered, a future erased without warning. The kind of loss that doesn't stay contained to one car, to one corner, but spills outwards, touching everyone who sees it, hears it, or explain it later. This wasn't just a shooting. It was a reminder of how fragile life is, how thin the line between ordinary moments and permanent loss really is. Gabrielle was more than a name in a report. She was someone who woke up that morning expecting to come home and didn't. And that weight stayed on the street long after the sirens faded. The weapons used were high capacity semi automatic rifles engineered for rapid fire firearms built for combat, not civilian streets. This was not random. This was intentional, precise violence carried out in daylight with no regard for witnesses or a child in the backseat. Gabrielle was rushed to the hospital but did not survive her injuries. Her boyfriend is alive, and the shooters, they remain at large, still driving that red Alfa Romeo. Police are pleading with the public. If you see something, say something. For the sake of the baby girl who just lost her mother and the city that refuses to accept this madness as normal. Chicago streets carry centuries of violence, from prehistoric massacres to modern shootings, and yet the story isn't just about the weapons or the numbers. It's about the children, the families, and the cycles that continue to ripple through generations. Research shows that children who grew up without stable parent support, a reality for many families affected by violence, are at significantly higher risk of behavioral issue, dropping out of school, and becoming involved in crime later in life. The crisis starts at home. Right now, 1 in 4 children in this country is growing up without a father. And when you look at the fallout, the numbers are staggering. 85% of youth sitting in state prisons came from fatherless homes. You see the same thing in juvenile hall, where 70% of the kids are coming from households with no father figures. Even on the streets, nearly 90% of the runaways and homeless youth are out there because they didn't have a father to go home to. Children from father absence home are 2-3 times more likely to engage in criminal activity. This isn't just theory, it's a cycle that fuels community already scarred by violence. When you put Chicago next to other cities, the math tells a dark story. In 2024, Chicago recorded around 573 homicides, more than New York, Los Angeles, and Houston. Chicago leads the nation in total murders, which is why it is often called the murder capital of America. But per capita, Chicago homicide rate is 21.5 per 100,000 residents, lower than cities like Baltimore, St. Louis, and Memphis, where rates have exceeded 50 per 100,000. So yes, more lives are lost in raw numbers in Chicago than almost anywhere else. But when you scale for population, other cities can be deadlier. The lesson here is this: violence isn't abstract. It has faces, it has histories, it also has children who inherit the consequences. So when another shooting happens, like the one on 79th and May, it's not just news stories. It's the continuation of three waves of violence: prehistoric and native conflicts, people fighting for survival and territory, organized crime and prohibition era wars, turf battles, speakeasies, and machine guns. And finally, modern street and gang violence, fueled by systematic inequality, easy access to firearms, and fractured families. And the children of these cycles, particularly those growing up without fathers, are statistically more likely to become the next generation caught in the crossfire. Just look at the numbers, see the patterns, and understand the costs. So just picture this, okay, guys? A warm meal not made by a mother who is no longer there. A frozen pizza pop in the microwave. On Sunday football night, where a father should be teaching his son how to hope, how to dream, how to be inspired by men battling for victory on the screen. We see the headlines, we refuse to see how these children live. 50 Cent said it best: people go to the zoo because they are fascinated by dangerous animals. It lets them get close without getting hurt. But until we get close enough to see the danger, until we confront it fully, nothing will ever change. These children deserve better. The responsibility is ours as adults to bear. It shouldn't have to be theirs.